Welcome into Locked On Knicks. The Knicks postseason might be over, but that means a pivotal offseason has now begun. Going to get into the latest news regarding some big contracts the Knicks could sign in-house. Talk about why I think the Knicks should make their draft picks this year because it's very necessary, I think. And of course, get into some potential trade targets in this offseason primer episode.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks, and this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, freshly home off of a Hawaii vacation, which conveniently, or rather inconveniently, fell right on the East semis. So I was keeping up with everything from 6 hours back, watching games in the afternoon, in the morning, and making my wife break up our vacation plans with watching Knicks games. So that was lovely, but she was supportive. That was great. But that's why you haven't seen my face in the last week or so. Thank you to Gavin and to XJ for holding it down while I was gone. Now I'm going to be kind of holding it down as we get into off-season coverage here, because unfortunately I thought maybe I would be coming back to some ECF talk, but no such luck, unfortunately. So I figured I'd quickly do just a little post-mortem for this season. I mean, obviously we were all there for it, but it's crazy to think about where we got to and how we got to there this season. And unless you're like that dude, Evan Roberts on WFAN, I think it is. I just saw him pop up in a video clip the other day being like, I don't know. I can't understand why Knicks fans were appreciative of this team that was down to like their last like 6 dudes and was like a one good run away from potentially making the Eastern Conference Finals with like a 6-man rotation. Unless you're like that guy, you probably feel pretty proud of this team and feel pretty good about what happened this season, and understand why this was a monumental season for the Knicks as a fan base. But whatever. I mean, I guess if you want to see why traditional radio shows are failing and podcasts are thriving, look no further than that guy, I guess. But let's just quickly talk about what this season was, right? Like, this team started with the expectation of just getting maybe slightly better after you basically just swap Obi Toppin for Dante DiVincenzo in the offseason. It's like it still sort of felt like things were in a holding pattern for like the big move, and they, that never happened. Well, I guess not in the sense that people thought. They didn't trade for like that huge splashy superstar, give up all the players, all the picks, go get whoever during the season. Instead, just kept building things and building things. Obviously, make the move for OG Anunoby, still keep all their draft picks intact, but deal RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly. You get another secretly get another good contributor in Precious Achiuwa that ends up playing a huge role down the stretch of the season. Then similarly make the move for Bogdanovich and Burks, still keeping those picks untouched, but you get rid of Quentin Grimes in the process, who was having kind of a tough start to the year, I guess a half plus of the year at that point. And then the team literally just plays like the best team in basketball for the whole month of January with that new big 3 of Brunson, Randall, and Anunoby intact. And I think that that's where maybe now, if there is people out there that are still like, oh, I can't believe they didn't make the Eastern Conference Finals or this, that, the other. Oh, they choked or whatever. Like, if there's anyone who's thinking that, it's probably because the expectations were set so high during that January with the team as healthy as they could be at that moment, essentially just down Mitchell Robinson at that time. But with Anunoby, with Randall, with Brunson, the team cooked. They were so good. And, then of course came the injuries. Julius Randle was the first big one, and OG gets hurt in the same game, and they're both out for an extended period of time. And you see the Knicks really limp into the All-Star break, limp out of the All-Star break. Dante DiVincenzo have to take on a huge role, which, by the way, the only reason that they were so comfortable trading Quentin Grimes when they did was because Dante DiVincenzo went from being a guy you expected to play maybe 15 to 20 minutes to one of the best three-point shooters in the entire NBA this year, which is crazy. But, this whole narrative that popped up during the playoffs where everybody just seemed to want to be like, oh, well, typical Tibbs team. Like, he ran all these guys ragged during the regular season, and now it's coming back to roost in the postseason. The Knicks, by the way, did not have a player in the top 13 in minutes per game leaders this year. And Jalen Brunson was the 14th. And then I believe Julius Randle was 15th or 16th or something like that. And then it's a pretty steep drop off after that. So, maybe leave that take at the door. I know it won't stop anybody from doing that, but, you kind of reached a point where during the postseason, you had to just play your best players to win. And that's what you have to do in the postseason. Like, that's the time you load manage during the regular season or whatever, or keep guys fresh during the regular season so that they can play as many minutes as humanly possible in the postseason to try to win basketball games. Like, there's no more load management in the postseason. That's just not how it works. I don't understand where anybody was thinking like, oh, the Knicks need to, rest their guys. Right? Like, no, that's not something you do in the playoffs. Sorry. Maybe it's people just aren't used to the playoffs enough yet as Knicks fans or whatever, or the people that thought that. But no, you have to play your best players in the playoffs to try to win. Anyway, I haven't really been able to get that take off because all this discourse about the minutes and everything kind of happened while I was on vacation. So, happy to get that take off real quick. But even the Randall injury was a fluke. He got undercut. He separated his shoulder. That sucks, but it wasn't an overuse issue. Mitch was intentionally injured by Embiid. So, I mean, that was not an overuse issue. The Bogey injury was kind of just bad luck. It was a hustle play. He was diving. He broke his foot. Whatever. That's not really overuse. That's just, it was tough. It was tough timing and just a tough situation. So, whatever. Like, I guess the OG injury and then eventually the hard injury right down the stretch of the Pacers series were from overuse, but that's the risk you run. It's the playoffs. You have to play your guys. But I think all in all, the biggest lesson, Brunson proves he's a number one, a 1A, a capital S superstar. I don't care how tall he is. I don't care what you thought about him coming into the season. I don't care if you mistakenly think that he did not perform against the Heat last year, which, I mean, everybody's like, oh, Candace Parker deserves and Becky Hammon, they deserve apologies. No, they don't. They were still wrong. Sorry. Yeah, Brunson and the hospital Knicks got knocked out by the Pacers, but that does not mean that they were right in saying that Brunson is not a superstar. So let's just get into like a few things that we now know about this team for sure. One, if Jalen Brunson is playing, you have a chance to win any game. Boom. That's lesson number one. And we saw that during this postseason. That's why they made it to within a game of the Eastern Conference Finals this year with essentially a 6-7 man rotation any given night. Two, the Knicks are incredibly deep. They were incredibly deep this year. And I don't think that's going to change next year. If anything, they're going to get deeper. And the amount of injuries that they endured to almost make the Eastern Conference Finals is honestly astounding. And I hopefully they get their flowers more as the postseason or as the offseason goes on, and people start looking back on this postseason. But they probably won't because nobody outside of Knicks fans appreciates these guys. But we do, and it was a Herculean effort to get as far as they did in these playoffs. Three, they still have plenty of ammo to make the big move if they so choose. And, I'll get into that in a second about whether I think they should, how aggressive I think they ought to be going for that, and a few names that I think they should maybe like look at. But they still have plenty of ammunition to make a move and some decent salary to make that happen. And they could potentially still make a big move and leave most of their core intact and ready to rock for next season. A team that again was one of the best teams in basketball with their three best players playing. And then number four, the Knicks might not even need to make that move. Like, there's really a case to be made that running this core back and then just making like a mid-level exception move to add a little more talent and drafting some players to, kind of fill out the back end of the roster and start the development cycle again. That might be enough to push this team over the top next year. Like, they were that good. They were really that good. And we saw in the postseason that even in a diminished form, they were good enough to almost make the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think there's a real case that you could say, like, most of the time, like Randall is an Iron Man. Like Randall, it takes a pretty serious injury to knock him out. Like as long as he doesn't have bad luck, he's going to play the whole season. And Brunson, same deal, Iron Man. Like all these guys on this team are studs as far as being able to make it through a whole season and give you quality playoff minutes. So there's a case to be made to just kind of keep it pushing. But yeah, I guess I'll just close this first segment by saying, like, if you're still bummed about the last game of the semis, like, I don't. So I was watching this from a bar in Hawaii, and I found another couple Knicks fans to watch the game with. Um, and there was just kind of this collective, like, once we all learned that Brunson was out for the rest of the game, I know I said, like, out loud, I was like, well, there's no point in winning this game now. I mean, it's almost like a mercy kill at this point. Like if the Knicks just go out here, because if you pulled off that win, and it would have been hilarious, from the standpoint of knocking Halliburton out or whatever, and would have been fun, to just like for laughing and bragging rights. But then you're essentially just sentencing the rest of those players to, like, especially like Deuce, Dante, Hart, to play like 48 minutes per game and get like swept or gentlemen swept by the Celtics. I mean, it was more humane to just have them go out there. So I didn't have an issue with it. I don't think anyone should, and I don't think, to circle back on the initial point, I don't think anyone should feel bad about feeling super proud of this team and being super happy with where they ended up this year. And there's so much to look forward to next year, and this offseason. I think this is honestly going to be one of, if not the most pivotal Knicks offseason of our lifetime this year, because I think they are genuinely in position to become a title contender next year if they can make just the right moves. And so I'm going to get into in just a second what I think some of those moves could be, starting in house with the guys on the Knicks, because we already are having some intel kind of leak out about what the Knicks' intentions could be, and who they might want to still retain and all that stuff, and what some of those contracts could start looking like. So I'm going to get into that in just a second, the next segment. But first, I got to let you know that this episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. And I'll tell you what, I think the shot that I would take right now is the T-Wolves for the title. You know what? I'm all aboard. I'm all aboard. I think they're my team now, the rest of the way out. It's nice to have a team to root for. My one cousin, inexplicably, despite growing up in this general area, more towards PA, is a big Timberwolves fan. So I'm going to jump on the bandwagon with him. That'll be fun. They're plus 280 right now, though, to win the title, which you place a $10 bet on them right now, you win 28 bucks. I mean, maybe you want to take that 150 you get as the incentive and put all that on it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying, but I'm saying I think that's a fun option, more fun than the Celtics, certainly. And they just took down the defending champs, who a lot of people thought might go back to back. So maybe the T-Wolves have got it and they're the place to go. Anyway, again, visit FanDuel.com/locked on, and you can make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and I'm back in to start getting into the things that this is just a rough outline. Every off season needs a primer at the beginning, right, to get you ready for what's to come. And so this is just kind of the starting point, and these are discussions that we're going to get into, probably individual episodes on individual guys and situations, and of course news dumps throughout this whole offseason here. But I think that the number one thing that the Knicks need to do this offseason is look in-house. You got to handle your business at home first, and then start looking at external things like the draft and trades and free agency and stuff like that. But I think that the most important things that the Knicks need to do, because of how good that core was, is work on keeping their guys that they already have on the roster right now that are going to be hitting free agency. So, of course, that first means Isaiah Hartenstein and OG Anunoby. They're the most important guys, part of the starting lineup. Projected starters for next year if the Knicks re-sign them. Part of that amazing starting lineup that, if you forgot by any chance, like the Knicks starting lineup with Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, and Isaiah Hartenstein played 334 possessions this year and were a plus 17.1 points per 100 possessions better than their opponents when those 5 guys played together. So, I mean, I think it's a priority. Like, re-sign those guys. Maybe you want to still try to make a big splash or something, but your priority should be getting those 2 guys locked back in because they were a huge part of what made that defense so good. So Hartenstein, to give just a quick primer on him, could re-sign for about 72.5 million over 4 years using early bird rights. So that's an average value of about 18 million per season. I think considering he was the guy he rolled with during the best stretch in modern Knicks history, plus the fact that, like, unfortunately, for better or worse, and I mean, I've made the case for years that a lot of his injuries have been kind of fluky, but no matter what, Mitch ends up on the injured list for a decent amount of time per year. It seems like maybe he's just snake bitten. Maybe it's, this year is a little more like ankle not looking good, had to get ankle surgery, all that stuff. So I think you need to kind of plan for what you do when Mitch isn't available. And I mean, Hartenstein obviously proved that he can be a starting center in the NBA and be a fantastic one at that. So I think you got to go for it and pay Hartenstein whatever he wants to get. Maybe you're tying up a little too much money in the center spot. Maybe you're, uh, going over 30 million for that, which I guess is not ideal for your starting and backup center in today's league if they're not like a megastar like a Jokic or something. But I think that you got to go for it. You got to re-sign him. And obviously the concern here is, could another team outbid the Knicks? There are some teams with a huge amount of cap space this year and not a super deep free agent pool. So like the Thunder kind of are a perfect destination. They could hit that territory where they maybe offer like just over 20 million or something to Hartenstein, and that might be enough to make the Knicks uncomfy. You also have like the Jazz, the Magic, the Raptors, the Pistons. They all have a ton of space. The Sixers also have a ton of space, but I don't think they make a lot of sense unless they're ready to move on from Embiid, which seems unlikely. So I don't know that iHeart would want to go to like a rebuilding situation after being on a winning situation with the Knicks, but the Thunder kind of loom big, I think, is the team that might give the Knicks some trouble. So that's going to be worth monitoring. But it's worth noting that Ian Begley today said in a column that he thinks that there's a decent chance that the Knicks and Hartenstein are already kind of talking about terms and probably will come to terms pretty quickly. So certainly hope that's the case because he definitely deserves it. Then we've got OG Anunoby, who has a $20 million player option for next year, which Stefan Bondy of the Daily News, in the shocker of all shockers, reports that he will most likely decline, which I don't think that surprises anyone. Then Fred Katz of The Athletic mentioned that Anunoby could potentially fetch around 35 to 40 million annually. So that would put you in like the 4-year, 140 to 160 million territory. And at this point, again, I think there's like valid concerns, just like there's valid concerns about, do you pay Hartenstein that much money and tie up that much in centers? There's concerns about like, hey, OG's kind of injury prone. And, he had that crop up this year with the Knicks, like not just with the elbow injury, which seemed like more of a freak thing, that just kind of needed to be addressed, but also the hamstring, which ultimately, might have cost the Knicks that series against the Pacers. Because if he was out there, who knows if they win one of the earlier games and it never gets to a game 7. So I mean, I think you still got to go for it though. I mean, injuries or not, you gave up enough for him that it would be foolish to not re-sign him at this point. I think you got to go for it, and you got to. I mean, they were 26-6 when he played this year between the regular season and the playoffs. Like that's elite. That is a top team. So if he has that level of impact on your team, you have to re-sign him. You pretty much have to include him as part of your core and, use him as a building block going forward. And so, the cost to give him up, the results, everything, or the cost to get him, the results, everything else, you have to go ahead and re-sign him, I think, even if it costs you 35 to 40 million annually. So we'll see how that all goes, but he will obviously be an unrestricted free agent as well. And some team might come and blow him away with like a super big max offer that, is higher than what the Knicks want. But I think the Knicks have to position themselves well to get him and, lock that up quickly and keep him on the team. There's also kind of I don't know if I want to call it a surprise report, but a report from Steve Popper of Newsday that Jalen Brunson might possibly be open to signing a 4-year, $156 million extension this summer, which could possibly forego literally over $100 million to stay on the Knicks. I mean, if he waited till next year and hit free agency, he could sign, I think it's a 5-year, 200 and 240 million extension. And I don't know if that becomes more depending on what happens with him as far as like all NBA teams and stuff over the next 2 years. But I mean, yeah, that's the no brainer of all no brainers. Like if he says, yeah, I'll take a 4-year, $156 million extension, you sign him up and you say, okay, sounds good. Thanks, bud. Like we'll find a way to make it up to you somehow, hopefully just with a championship parade at some point. Because yeah, that would be such a huge underpay for him. I mean, if you could lock him up onto a contract that pays him under 40 million a year annually to be one of the 10 or so best, easily 10 best players in the NBA at this point, if not better. Yeah, yeah, you do that, and then you just keep building the team around him, and you hope that that flexibility grants you enough leeway to build a championship roster around him. Because that, and then you don't run into the problems that a team like Boston might be running into very shortly when they have to give Jason Tatum like a supermax extension to go with Jalen Brown's supermax extension to go with all the other huge contracts that they have. That's going to make them make really tough decisions as far as the salary cap and the luxury tax and everything else. Like if Brunson takes that deal, you do it a million times over. Likewise, Julius Randle could be up for a 4-year, roughly $190 million extension was the number that I saw floating that would be about what he could get. But we already saw him take significantly less than he was worth the last time he was up for an extension to keep this team flexible. And that was after his career year in 20 to 21. So maybe he'll do it again. Um, Similarly, I think if he's willing to do that as well, you just say, okay, sign the dotted line and you take it. Cause anytime you can have a superstar, an all NBA player at significantly less than what they could potentially get on the open market, you do it. And Randall, maybe he's just comfortable being instead of a 60 millionaire per year, a 30 millionaire per year and living in New York and playing for a team that he loves with a guy that he loves in Brunson and everything else, like, and a coach that he loves, obviously, in Tibbs, like, if he's willing to do it, you do it, I think. Obviously, the 4-year 190 starts getting more in the territory of, like 50 million per season almost. So if that's what he's going to want, then, maybe that gives you slightly more pause. But either way, like, yeah, I think if he's willing to take a deal somewhat similar to Brunson and they want to kind of align their fates still, which they currently are as far as when their contracts expire and all that, then cool. Just keep that core in place and let these guys ride together and, hopefully build something special. Then just two quick guys to clean this segment up before we move on to, what to do with some of the other, with the draft capital and with potential trade targets in the next segment. But Precious Achua, he's a restricted free agent this year. It's so tough to predict what his market's going to be, but he was so good for the Knicks when they needed him the most that it's tough to make a case against re-signing him if you can make it work and not give him like a huge bag. Like, I don't know if that's just under 10 million or something like that per season. Like, does he take like 4 for 40, maybe on a descending deal or something like that? I don't know. But I like, you might have to include, much I hate to say, like, you might have to use Mitchell Robinson as salary in a trade package at some point, or at least that maybe allows you to be a little more comfortable in doing so, especially if you use a draft pick on a center. You can have Precious back up Hartenstein, which he did very well throughout the regular season and in the playoffs, and filled in well when needed. So I don't know. The one luxury that the Knicks do have here, though, is that he is a restricted free agent. So they could just kind of let his market set itself. And then, if he signs an offer sheet that they find reasonable, they can just say, okay. And otherwise, they could just be like, sorry, dude, like, we got to let you go. Happy trails, best of luck elsewhere. We got other plans, through the draft or whatever to pay our third string center a little less. But I think he's worth potentially re-signing if the cost isn't astronomical. And then Alec Burks is a free agent. And like, I'm not going to lie, if this was 3 weeks ago, I'd be like, okay, bye. See you later, Burks. But he came through in the postseason when they needed him, and he's hitting kind of the tail end of his career. I mean, if he wants to come back on roughly like a minimum contract or maybe slightly more than that, and just kind of be okay with being a break in case of emergency option for the Knicks, like, I don't hate it. So maybe he's worth bringing back too. We'll see where things go with Burks, but I mean, I know that Tibbs definitely still likes him, I think, and I think he still likes Tibbs despite not playing for a good part of the season until the playoffs this year. But um, yeah, I mean, he's a good player. He's a good shooter. He maybe he's a little too tunnel visiony, but hopefully could be broken of that in training camp and all that. And he certainly did a lot better in the playoffs. So I'd be willing to potentially bring him back. But the Knicks also have 3 draft picks this year. And as I mentioned, a bunch of ammo to potentially make a star trade. So I'm going to address those 2 topics in my last 2 items for the offseason primer in just a sec. But first, I got to let you all know about our good friends over at Prize Picks. And Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. And you can get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks right now as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. And of course, we're getting close to the finals. So you want to, get in on that action while you still can. There's only so much basketball left before we hit full on off-season mode. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you could turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I I I might be making some more like baseball picks and stuff now or something, like just something a little different. Basketball, little raw still at the moment. I watched some of the first game of the ECF tonight, watched like the overtime and whatever. It was fine, it was cool, I guess. A little sad. So maybe I'll be making some baseball picks. But what's cool is, if you decide you want to play a little bit of both, still watch some basketball, but also, bet on the Mets or Yankees. Maybe don't bet on the Mets too hard as far as them doing good things. But, you could go ahead and pick them in your entry and do a multi-sport entry, which is honestly one of the most fun things you can do on Prize Picks and have your hand in multiple pots during all the games of any given night. So download the app today and use code Locked On NBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app today and use code Locked On NBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, and I'm back in to get into my final 2 things for the Knicks to look at this offseason. Again, I think you can pretty easily distill what they need to do into 3 things, which is take care of their own free agents, how they're going to approach the draft, and then potentially making a big splash in, we'll call it trade slash free agency. I'll get into why in just a second here. But first, the draft. Like, I think the main thing that I noticed towards the end of this year, particularly as the Knicks were, dealing with the depth concerns and everything, is that we're kind of past the point where it felt for a couple years like every single roster spot on the Knicks felt consequential. And like, you had like Jericho Sims was like your 15th man. And you're like, oh, well, he's actually like sort of serviceable. Like that's a solid player to keep down the end there. And you had like Deuce McBride and Quentin Grimes and all these like rookies and whatever. And then obviously all the vets ahead of them. And it was like, like there's not really a lot of like dead weight roster spots here. So when certain things did come up, when it's like, oh, we're a little light on wing depth or whatever, it would help to get someone off free agency for a little bit right now. It was like a really tough decision to figure out who to cut to make that happen. But the Knicks closed this season and we're in the playoffs with Jericho Sims, Mamadi Diakite, Daquan Jeffries, and Shake Milton at the end of the bench. So I think all those guys are expendable, honestly. And that, all apologies to Jericho Sims. Like I've loved what he's done with the Knicks, over these last few years. But, I think that he's a serviceable guy in the regular season for spot minutes that you can't really trust in the postseason. And if the Knicks could use that spot on someone that they draft that potentially has a higher ceiling, they should totally go for that. Cause like Sims came in as an old rookie anyway. So the Knicks have picks 24, 25, and 38 in this year's draft. That means get ready, guys. It's going to be a busy month of draft coverage. We're going to definitely get tons of good guests. I'm probably going to try to secure one by the end of this week to start getting a little bit of a primer going. And we're going to talk to a lot of people about this draft to try to kind of get ready. And, hopefully the Knicks will make some picks this year because it's not totally unprecedented for the Leon Rose era to use 3 picks in a draft. And in fact, they used 4 in one draft. In 2021, they drafted Grimes, Deuce, Sims, and Rokas Jokubaitis before not making any selections the last 2 drafts. But then the draft before that, they selected Obi and Emmanuel quickly as well. So like they have used draft picks in the past. Now, granted, they were in more of a rebuild mode then at that point and trying to kind of build the roster out. And now they've traded off some of those guys. Deuce is kind of like the last remaining guy of all those of all those drafted players now at this point, unless you count Sims, like which again, I just think Sims is kind of I hate to say it, kind of run his course at this point. Like I'm sure that he'll find NBA contracts for until he's like 30 something. Like he's a good reserve big, but I don't know if I'm keeping him or making a point to keep him at this point where you're trying to potentially make the leap into contention. But before I get into like the draft picks, I should bring up I mentioned Rokas Jokubaitis, and it seems like he's ready to come to the US this year. So back in March, it was reported by Sportando that he was ready to take part in Summer League this year, which means he would do that for the Knicks because they have his draft rights, and hopefully break into the NBA next year, or else find a new team in Europe other than Barcelona, probably for a bigger starting role. If I had to guess, he's kind of had like he's had like a bench role there, and kind of at least from what it seems like, and he's played some big minutes at times, but I think he would want to kind of be like a star somewhere if he was going to stay in Europe rather than if he comes to the NBA, obviously, I think you would know he would be playing a role. But he averaged 15 points, 5.5 assists, shot 57% from the field, 49% from three, and 71% from the free throw line per 36 in the Liga ACB this year for Barcelona. So, I mean, and that was, I think, like 31 games or something. And then he played another 31 games or so, put up similar numbers, but with worse 3-point shooting when they played in EuroLeague action. So, he had a really good year for Barcelona. I mean, it all evened out to like, in just his per game totals, it was like 7 points a game, like 3 assists or something like that. Cause he only played like 17, 18 minutes per game. But he did really good. And I think he honestly plays a very Tibbsy style of basketball. Like Tibbs wants his point guards to be able to break down a defense and doesn't care as much about them on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Rokas can really do a lot of the offensive things Tibbs loves. And I think honestly, with some development, he could give you a true bench point guard and honestly, sort of like a Brunson light, like give you a decent impression of what Brunson does. Like he's shown some pretty impressive shot making. He's shown some really nice passing after breaking down the defense to like kick it out to the perimeter and stuff. I think he's done a lot of growing up since he made that appearance for the Knicks in Summer League a few years ago. So uh, I'm totally down to bring him over. I think it's time. And I think this postseason kind of proved the Knicks could definitely use a more bona fide option behind Jalen Brunson than just Deuce McBride as far as like a backup ball handler. So hopefully they bring over Rokas and treat that almost like draft pick number 1. But otherwise, like use those other 3 picks, look for 3-and-D type players, possibly a new third string big for behind Hartenstein and Mitch, and maybe even Precious, but like just get a developmental guy. Walt Perrin, who's the head scout for the Knicks, was the guy that discovered Rudy Gobert in Utah and has had a pretty good draft record in general with those mid-20s picks. We've seen with the Knicks, he certainly crushed it, and he used to crush it with the Jazz too. So, maybe look for another big, look for some other 3-and-D type players. And just I think that those salary spots and having players on rookie contracts can be huge. Like the Knicks have basically none of them left. They now have Deuce, who's on like a glorified rookie contract for his second deal. Like he's only making like 4 million a season for the next 3 years, I believe. So you've got that locked in. That's sick. He's a really good young player who really proved himself in the playoffs, which is awesome. So he would be attractive to some team, trying to, trade their superstar or whatever. But I think otherwise, like I'll actually illustrate in a second why like rookie deals can be really important for potential like big star trades or whatever too. Um, on top of the fact that then you have bodies back there that aren't just journeyman end of bench guys like the Knicks had this year, and are more like young guys with big potential that, hey, if you give them the right playing situation and bring them along just right, like a Deuce McBride, like maybe when they need to step up, they step in and they snatch a role and are that good. Or just show enough when you put them in from time to time that you can eventually use them as, trade chips in a big deal to kind of bolster a trade package a bit. But Let's talk about that for a second as far as the trade stuff goes. And, again, I I'll just preface this by saying I would not fault anyone that just wants to run it back with this team and just say, re-sign the guys, maybe pick up one other guy with the MLE, draft some players. Let's roll. Let's see how this goes this year, because the team was so good this year when they were healthy that I totally would not fault that. But you got to keep your, obviously got to keep your options open. And I think my overall strategy would be like, don't go looking for a star trade necessarily. Like, don't look thirsty for one, but be open to one if you get the availability. So just a few names that I'll throw out there with just brief explanations. Paul George, I think things are really tumultuous in LA right now. So if he could work a sign and trade, and leave most of the core intact, I think that's a move to make potentially. LA, I think, would cooperate in that scenario, because otherwise it would be like you lose him for nothing, or you sign and trade him to his preferred destination and you get some stuff back. Like maybe some slightly serviceable players. Would probably include Mitchell Robinson, unfortunately, to make salaries match. Bojan Bogdanovic, who, if Kawhi's still staying around, whatever, you can still just kind of try to do something. Um, and some draft picks, maybe get a couple of the Knicks protected first round picks or something. But there's also an option where Paul George could opt into the final year of his deal, which is worth, I think, like 48, 49 million. And I checked into this, and I'm fairly certain that the Knicks could make that deal work with Bogey, Mitch, and then you pick up Jericho Sims and Daquan Jeffries have like $2 million team options for this next year, which I think is why the Knicks gave them those deals for potential trades like this. So they could opt them into those deals and then trade one of the players that they picked at 24 or 25 in August, uh, when those deals mature. So like rookie deals mature quicker than a free agent contract. So if you sign a guy to his rookie deal, you can include him in a trade in mid-August. And most famously, we saw this happen with Andrew Wiggins in the Kevin Love deal that brought Kevin Love to Cleveland when LeBron went back. Wiggins went out in that deal because he signed his rookie deal, and then the Cavs included that salary as part of the outgoing package for Kevin Love when they were allowed to in mid-August, which is much sooner than the December 15th start date for all other contracts signed during the offseason. So big deal for potentially making a draft pick here. And the Knicks could like agree to that deal in early July and then consummate it once they hit August there to get that through. So something to keep in mind with Paul George. I'm sure we'll have more conversations. I'm certainly going to be talking to my fellow Locked On hosts about potential deals and running some mock negotiations and stuff. Speaking of, we'll get to talk to one of our faves, the Cavs hosts, Donovan Mitchell. So, I mean, I know having a Donovan Mitchell saga 2.0 can sound kind of unappealing, but unlike last time, I think he's going into what could be the final year of his where he's going into what could for sure be the final year of his contract, because he has an opt out after next year, which gives him a little more leverage to request a specific destination, which he was a little wishy-washy about doing the last time around, maybe because he realized he didn't have that specific leverage that he would have needed to go where he wanted to. So that doesn't mean the Cavs would be forced to trade him to the Knicks, but he could play the like, I will only extend with the Knicks card, and otherwise I'm going to hit free agency and you might lose me for nothing, other team that's not the Knicks. And if that's the case, then the Knicks would be well ahead of things, and they could, they'd still have to field a competitive offer, but not as huge of a one as what the Cavs ultimately gave up for Mitchell, I don't think. So that would be sick. And so if you can hold on to like Brunson, Randall, and OG in the deal, I think you like kind of have to entertain that. And I don't think that either of the Nova guys would be out as well. I think they're more or less ironclad at this point. So you'd probably again do like Bogey, Mitch, and some picks, and you could potentially get that done if Cleveland's willing to play ball. So we'll see. Two other names to look at: Devin Booker. Salary wise, he's similar basketball fit to Donovan Mitchell, but salary wise, a lot more difficult to get to. You'd have to start getting a little more creative because he makes a decent chunk more money than Donovan Mitchell. So it'd probably be like Bogey, Mitch, and then maybe you could get there with that same Paul George package that I just mentioned a minute ago, because they make similar amounts of money, but I think Booker maybe makes slightly more. So you'd have to maybe find another player to throw in there. Could get a little messy. I think it's increasingly unlikely that the Suns are looking to deal him at this point. They just hired Mike Budenholzer. It seems like they're just like, no, we're going to ride this out because we need this to work, or else like we have no draft picks until 2030. So this can be really bad for us. So um, maybe slightly less likely, but still, because he's a former Leon Rose client, name worth monitoring, I think, in Devin Booker. And then the last name I'll throw out there, I know will make a lot of people angry based off the last episode we put out that had his name in the title, but LeBron James. I mean, I know a lot of people would hate it, and hey, maybe rightfully so. He's he's certainly a domineering presence, and brings a lot of pressure with him to win, and a lot of fanfare and all that. And in New York, that would just be amplified to the nth degree. But if the Knicks pull the draft Bronny move and use one of those draft picks to draft LeBron's son and bring him to New York, and then LeBron is willing to come over for maybe slightly less, like maybe again, this maybe just centers around Bogey and Mitch, as far as the salary, and then you just sign LeBron to whatever salary you can to make that work and bring him over to play with his son, mentor his son, whatever, and hopefully win a title. I mean, I think that like if you have a lineup of Brunson, LeBron, OG, Randall, and Hartenstein is like your starting lineup. And then you could bring Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart off the bench along with whoever else. I mean, a Deuce McBride still, whatever. Like, I think you're pretty well set, dude. Like, I think that's the championship favorite for next year. So, I mean, it's something that the Knicks maybe should consider. Although, again, I know for those of us that love the heart of this team and what we just went through this year with falling in love with these guys and what they've built here and everything else, to then bring LeBron James on would feel a little dirty, maybe, but would probably get you over the top and make you the prohibitive favorites to win a championship. So that would be cool, but that'll be something else to talk about later on too, because why not? There's plenty to talk about now. We got plenty of time. I've already gone on for long enough for today, but until next time, thank you all for listening. And I'll be back with lots more great off-season content this week, hopefully with some guests coming up. But yeah, thank you all for listening. Talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.